I never thought installing a wind turbine on my property would lead to a war with the HOA. But here I am, sitting in my powered home while my neighbors cursed my name in the dark. My name is Samuel Irving, and I live in a planned community called Desert Winds Estates in Scottsdale, Arizona. When I bought my house 3 years ago, the real estate agent made a big deal about the progressive environmental policies in the neighborhood. Solar panels were encouraged, xeriscaping was practically mandatory, and the HOA documents specifically mentioned supporting renewable energy initiatives. That last part would come back to bite them. I work as an electrical engineer for a tech company in Phoenix, and I have always been interested in sustainable energy. My house sits on one of the larger lots in the development, about 2 acres on the edge of the community where the properties back up against open desert. The wind patterns in that area are remarkably consistent, sweeping down from the mountains almost year-round. It was perfect for what I had in mind. 6 months ago, I started the process of installing a residential wind turbine. Not one of those massive commercial ones you see in wind farms, but a substantial residential model with a tower height of 80 feet and a rotor diameter of 18 feet. The thing could generate up to 10 kilowatts under optimal conditions, more than enough to power my home with plenty left over. I did my research thoroughly, obtained all the necessary permits from the county, hired certified installers, and made sure everything was up to code. The county officials were actually excited about it, calling it a model project for residential renewable energy. The HOA documents had a clause requiring approval for exterior modifications, so I submitted my plans to the Architectural Review Committee 2 months before installation. I included engineering specifications, environmental impact studies, noise assessments, and even aesthetic renderings showing how the turbine would look from various angles in the community. The packet was nearly 100 pages long. I heard nothing back for 6 weeks. When I called the HOA management company, they said my request was still under review. Another 2 weeks passed. I called again, and they said the committee was discussing it. Finally, 1 week before the scheduled installation, I received a brief email stating that my wind turbine plan was approved, subject to standard community guidelines. I saved that email and printed 3 copies, filing them in different places. Something about the terse response made me cautious. The installation took 3 days in late October. The crew was professional and efficient, digging a deep concrete foundation, raising the tower in sections, and finally mounting the turbine assembly. By the 3rd afternoon, my wind generator was operational. The blades began turning in the desert breeze, and I watched my home energy monitor as the system started feeding power into my house, then into the battery bank I had installed in my garage, and finally back into the grid through a net metering agreement with the power company. That first week was glorious. My electric bills dropped to almost nothing. In fact, with the strong November winds, I was generating more power than I could use. The excess was going back to the grid, and the power company was crediting my account. I was on track to have negative energy costs for the year. Then I met Gladys. Gladys Owens was the HOA president, a position she had held for 7 consecutive years. She was 53 years old, had perfectly styled blonde hair that never moved in the wind, and wore pastel pantsuits like they were armor. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a personalized license plate that read, HOA Boss. I had seen her at a few community meetings but never interacted with her directly. That was about to change. It was a Tuesday evening when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Gladys standing there with 2 other people I recognized from the HOA board. One was Marcus Chen, the treasurer, a nervous-looking man in his 40s who kept adjusting his glasses. The other was Patricia Donnelly, the secretary, a thin woman with tight lips and suspicious eyes. "Good evening, Samuel," Gladys said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We hope to have a moment of your time to discuss your new addition." I stepped aside and let them in. We sat in my living room and I offered them water, which they declined. "Your wind turbine is quite impressive," Gladys began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We have been getting a lot of questions from other residents about it." "I am happy to answer any questions," I said. "The system has been performing even better than projected." "Yes, well, that is actually what we wanted to discuss," Gladys continued. She pulled out a folder from her oversized purse. "You see, Desert Winds Estates is a community. We believe in sharing resources and supporting one another. Your turbine is generating quite a bit of excess power, we understand." I felt a cold sensation in my stomach. "That is correct. The excess goes back to the grid through net metering." Gladys waved her hand dismissively. Yes, the grid. But what about your neighbors? What about your community?" "We have been discussing this at the board level, and we think it would be beneficial for everyone if you shared your excess power with the neighborhood." I stared at her. "I am sorry, what exactly are you proposing?" Patricia spoke up, her voice sharp. "We are proposing that you disconnect from net metering and instead distribute your excess power to the homes in Desert Winds Estates. It would reduce everyone's energy costs and demonstrate true community spirit." My engineering brain immediately identified about 50 problems with that suggestion. That is not how electrical systems work. I cannot just run power lines to other houses. That would require a complete reconstruction of the neighborhood's electrical infrastructure, permits from the county, approval from the power company, and would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not to mention the liability issues, safety concerns, and the fact that it is probably illegal. Marcus cleared his throat. "We have consulted with an electrician who says it is possible." "Which electrician?" I asked. "That is not important right now," Gladys interjected. "What is important is that you are generating power using a structure that is part of our community. Therefore, that power should benefit the community." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I paid for the turbine myself. It is on my property. I went through all the proper channels and received approval from both the county and the HOA. The power it generates is mine." "Actually," Patricia said, pulling out a document from Gladys's folder, "according to Section 12, Paragraph 8 of the HOA covenants, any amenity or improvement that provides benefit to the community may be subject to community sharing requirements at the discretion of the board." I held out my hand for the document. She hesitated but gave it to me. I read the section carefully. It was vaguely worded and seemed to refer to things like community pools, parks, or shared facilities. There was nothing about privately owned power generation equipment. "This does not apply to my turbine," I said, handing it back. "This clause is about community amenities, not private property improvements." Gladys stood up, her friendly facade cracking. "The board has made a decision, Samuel. We expect you to comply. We will be sending you formal documentation outlining the power sharing arrangement we expect you to implement within the next 30 days. "And if I refuse?" I asked, standing as well. Her smile turned icy. "Then we will have to take appropriate action. Good evening." They left, and I immediately called my lawyer. His name was David Martinez, and he had handled my house closing. I explained the situation, and he listened carefully. "They cannot force you to do this," David said. "Your turbine is your private property, and the power it generates belongs to you. That HOA clause they cited does not apply. Send me everything they send you, and do not agree to anything without talking to me first. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 letters from the HOA, each more demanding than the last. They claimed I was violating community standards, acting against the collective interest, and failing to uphold the values of Desert Winds Estates. The third letter included a fine of $500 for failure to comply with board directives. I did not pay the fine. David sent them a response explaining that their demands were legally baseless and that any further harassment would result in legal action. That is when things escalated. The following Monday, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my door. It was a summons to a special HOA meeting to discuss concerns regarding Samuel Irving's wind turbine installation and its impact on the community. The meeting was scheduled for that Friday evening at 7 in the community clubhouse. I called David. "Should I attend this?" "Absolutely," he said. "I will come with you. They are going to try to ambush you, and you will want legal representation present." Friday arrived, and I drove to the clubhouse with David. When we walked in, I was shocked to see at least 60 people packed into the room. Normally, HOA meetings attracted maybe 10 residents, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. This was different. Gladys stood at the front with the rest of the board. When she saw David, her expression soured. "Mr. Irving, this is a community meeting," she said. "Lawyers are not necessary." "Mr. Martinez is here as my guest," I replied, taking a seat in the front row. "Please proceed." Gladys called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about community values, shared resources, and the importance of residents contributing to the collective good. Then she dropped her bombshell. As many of you know, Samuel Irving has installed a large wind turbine on his property. What you may not know is that this turbine generates significantly more power than he uses, but he has refused to share this excess power with his neighbors. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw people looking at me, some curious, others disapproving. "We asked Mr. Irving nicely to consider a community power-sharing arrangement," Gladys continued. "He refused. We believe this is against the spirit of Desert Winds Estates and violates our community covenants." David stood up. "May I speak?" Gladys looked like she had bitten into a lemon. "This is a community meeting, and my client is a community member being publicly accused of wrongdoing. I think he deserves the opportunity to respond." She gestured grudgingly for him to proceed. David explained the situation clearly and factually. He outlined how I had followed all proper procedures, obtained all necessary approvals, and that my wind turbine was my private property. He explained that the excess power was being returned to the grid through a legal net metering agreement, and that the HOA's demands were not only unreasonable but potentially illegal. "Mr. Irving is generating his own power on his own property with his own equipment," David said. "Demanding that he share it is like demanding he share his car, his furniture, or any other personal property. The HOA has no legal standing to make this demand." A man in the back raised his hand. "But would not it be nice if we could all benefit from his wind power? My electric bill was over $300 last month." "That is not the point," David responded. "Whether it would be nice is irrelevant. The law protects property rights. If Mr. Irving chose to share his power voluntarily, that would be his decision, but he cannot be forced to do so." A woman spoke up. "Maybe he should move to a different neighborhood if he does not want to be part of a community." The room erupted in argument, people shouting over each other. Gladys banged a gavel, calling for order. "Clearly, this is a divisive issue," she said. "The board will take all feedback under advisement and make a final decision. This meeting is adjourned." As people filed out, several neighbors approached me. Some were supportive, saying the HOA had no right to my property. Others were hostile, accusing me of being selfish and not caring about the community. One older man actually poked me in the chest and said I was everything wrong with America today. Over the weekend, I received an email from the HOA. They had voted to impose a special assessment of $5,000 on my property to offset the visual and environmental impact of the wind turbine on community property values. Furthermore, they were revoking my approval for the turbine and demanding its removal within 90 days. David read the email and actually laughed. They are really digging themselves a hole here. They approved the turbine, you installed it in good faith, and now they are trying to retroactively revoke approval. And a $5,000 special assessment with no legitimate basis. We can fight this. I do not want to fight, I said. I just want to be left alone. I know, but they are not going to leave you alone. We need to take action before this gets worse. David filed a lawsuit against the HOA on my behalf, seeking declaratory judgment that their demands were invalid and requesting an injunction against the fines and special assessment. The lawsuit also asked for reimbursement of my legal fees. The HOA responded by sending a new letter to every resident in Desert Winds Estates, painting me as a selfish troublemaker who was suing the community and costing everyone money. They claimed that legal fees from defending against my lawsuit would be paid from HOA funds, meaning everyone's dues would increase. The letter strongly implied that this was all my fault for not being a team player. My mailbox was vandalized the next day, smashed with a baseball bat. Someone spray-painted "Share the Power" on my driveway. I filed police reports for both incidents, but the officers said without witnesses or camera footage, there was little they could do. I installed security cameras around my property that afternoon. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the power company. They informed me that the HOA had contacted them claiming my wind turbine was interfering with the neighborhood's electrical system and requesting that my net metering agreement be suspended pending an investigation. Is there any evidence of interference? I asked the representative. No, sir. We have monitored your connection and everything is functioning perfectly within specifications. The HOA does not have authority to impact your net metering agreement. I am calling as a courtesy to let you know they tried. Thank you for the heads up. The harassment continued. The HOA sent me violation notices for increasingly trivial things. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 10 minutes past the allowed time. My lawn was supposedly a quarter-inch taller than permitted. My mailbox post was claimed to be the wrong shade of white. Each violation came with a $50 fine. David sent cease and desist letters. The HOA ignored them. Then, in mid-December, we had a major windstorm roll through Scottsdale. It was not a hurricane-level event, but it was significant, with sustained winds of 45 miles per hour and gusts up to 65. The storm hit in the evening, and the power went out across large parts of the Phoenix metro area. My house remained powered. The wind turbine was designed for exactly these conditions. It kicked into high gear and my battery banks filled to capacity. My house had lights, heating, refrigeration, internet, and everything else. I watched through my windows as the neighborhood sat in complete darkness. The power company estimated it would take 12 to 18 hours to restore electricity to our area. A transformer substation had been damaged, and crews were working as fast as they could. Around 9 p.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera first and saw Gladys standing there with Marcus and Patricia. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door. Gladys looked stressed, her perfect hair slightly disheveled from the wind. "Samuel, we need your help," she said, and for the first time she sounded genuine. "The whole neighborhood is without power. People are cold. Some have medical equipment that needs electricity. Your turbine is still working. Can you help us?" I looked at the three of them standing in the darkness. "You want me to share my power?" "Yes," Gladys said. "Please. This is an emergency. You have spent the last 2 months demanding I share my power, fining me, harassing me, and turning the neighborhood against me. Now you are asking nicely because you need something." Marcus spoke up. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. People are suffering right now. Whatever our disagreements, surely you can help your neighbors in an emergency." I considered it. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, to help despite everything. But another part of me, the part that had been pushed and harassed and vilified for months, wanted them to face consequences. "I cannot help you," I said. "Cannot or will not," Patricia snapped. "Both," I replied. "Even if I wanted to, I do not have the infrastructure to distribute power to other homes. You cannot just plug houses into my system. That is what I tried to explain to you months ago. And even if it were possible, I would not help the people who have made my life hell for the crime of generating my own electricity." "You are a selfish, horrible person," Patricia said. "I am a person who followed every rule, got every approval, and has been punished for it by a power-hungry HOA board. The power will be back on in 12 hours. Everyone will survive. Good night." I closed the door. Through the security camera, I watched them stand there for a moment before walking back into the darkness. The next morning, the power was restored. I received an email from Gladys with the subject line, "Formal Complaint." She claimed that my refusal to help during the power outage demonstrated that I was a danger to the community, and that the board would be pursuing all available options to remove me from Desert Winds Estates. David read it and shook his head. "They really do not know when to quit. Our court date is in 3 weeks. Let them keep digging." But Gladys had one more card to play. The next HOA newsletter, which went to all 400 homes in Desert Winds Estates, featured a front-page article about the power outage. It painted a picture of a suffering community, while one selfish resident hoarded power for himself. It included quotes from a woman whose oxygen concentrator had stopped working, forcing her to use backup tanks. It mentioned children who were frightened of the dark. It described elderly residents shivering in the cold. Then it mentioned me by name, describing my refusal to assist neighbors in need and calling it a shocking display of disregard for human welfare. The article went viral in the neighborhood Facebook group. People I had never met were calling me names, saying I should be forced to leave, claiming I had endangered lives. Someone created a petition to have the county revoke my wind turbine permit. My security cameras caught people driving slowly past my house, staring, pointing. One night, someone threw eggs at my front door. Another night, someone left a bag of dog feces on my porch. I stopped going to the community gym. I avoided the local grocery store where I might run into neighbors. I became a prisoner in my own home. Ironically, the only home in the neighborhood that would have power during the next outage. The court date arrived in early January. David had filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the facts were not in dispute and that the law clearly supported my position. The HOA had hired a lawyer, a stern woman named Rebecca Sutton, who specialized in HOA law. The hearing took place in Maricopa County Superior Court. Judge Thomas Henderson presided, a no-nonsense man in his 60s with a reputation for not tolerating foolishness. David presented our case, walking through my approval process, the installation, the HOA's retroactive demands, the fines, and the harassment. He submitted the original HOA approval email, the county permits, expert testimony about the legality of my wind turbine, and documentation of every fine and violation notice. Rebecca Sutton argued that the HOA had broad authority to regulate community affairs, and that my wind turbine, despite being on my property, affected the entire community. She claimed that the HOA had the right to revoke approval if circumstances changed, and that my refusal to help during the power outage demonstrated that I was not a good fit for the community. Judge Henderson listened patiently, asking occasional questions. When both sides had finished, he sat back in his chair. "Let me make sure I understand the HOA's position," he said. "You approved Mr. Irving's wind turbine. He installed it at great personal expense, following all county regulations. Then you decided you wanted access to the power it generates. When he refused, you attempted to revoke your approval and fine him. Is that correct?" Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the situation is more nuanced than that." "I do not think it is," Judge Henderson said. "The HOA approved the turbine. Mr. Irving relied on that approval. You cannot simply change your mind because you decided you want something he has. That is called buyer's remorse, and it does not apply here. As for the power outage, Mr. Irving had no legal obligation to assist his neighbors, regardless of how morally questionable some might find his refusal." "Your Honor, the covenants," Rebecca began. "The covenants do not grant the HOA ownership of residents' personal property," Judge Henderson interrupted. "Mr. Irving's wind turbine is his property. The power it generates is his property. The HOA has no claim to either. Motion for summary judgment is granted. The special assessment is void. All fines are void, and the revocation of approval is void. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Irving's reasonable attorney fees and to issue a retraction of the newsletter article. This case is dismissed." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. David shook my hand, smiling. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca approached us. "We will appeal this." "No, you will not," David said. "Judge Henderson's ruling is absolutely correct on the law, and you know it. If you appeal and lose, you will owe even more attorney fees. Advise your client to accept the judgment and move on." She walked away without responding. That should have been the end of it. The court had ruled in my favor. The HOA had been ordered to back off, and I had won. But Gladys was not done. A week after the court ruling, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a notice that a special election was being held to amend the community covenants. The proposed amendment would ban wind turbines and require removal of any existing turbines within 6 months. I called David immediately. "Can they do this?" "Technically, yes. HOA covenants can be amended if a sufficient percentage of homeowners vote to approve the change. Usually it requires 2/3 or 3/4 approval. What does your HOA require?" I pulled out my covenant documents. 3/4 of all homeowners must vote in favor. "That is a high bar," David said. "They would need 300 votes out of 400 homes. That is a lot. But even if they pass it, there is something called a grandfather clause. You installed your turbine under the old rules. They would have a hard time forcing you to remove it. But they are going to try. Of course they are. Gladys does not strike me as someone who accepts defeat gracefully." The HOA scheduled the vote for mid-February, giving themselves 5 weeks to campaign. And campaign they did. They held informational meetings about the dangers of wind turbines. They distributed flyers claiming turbines caused health problems, killed birds, and lowered property values. They shared photos of commercial wind farms and implied that my residential turbine was the same size. I tried to counter the misinformation. I created my own flyers with facts about my turbine, its noise levels, its safety record, and its environmental benefits. I posted information in the neighborhood Facebook group, though my posts were often deleted by the moderators for being divisive. Some neighbors supported me. A man named Robert Singh, an engineer who lived 4 streets over, went door to door explaining the benefits of renewable energy. A retired teacher named Alice Foster wrote a passionate letter to the HOA defending property rights, but they were in the minority. The vote took place on a Saturday in February. Homeowners could vote in person at the clubhouse or submit ballots by mail. I voted against the amendment, though I knew my single vote meant little. That evening, the HOA announced the results. Out of 400 homes, 312 had voted. 247 voted in favor of the amendment, 65 voted against. They were short. The amendment required 300 votes to pass, and they only got 247. The proposal failed. I celebrated with David that night at a steakhouse in Phoenix. We toasted to property rights and the rule of law. "Do not get too comfortable," David warned. "Gladys will try again. People like her do not give up." He was right. 3 weeks later, Gladys called another special election, this time with a revised amendment. Instead of banning wind turbines outright, it limited them to a maximum height of 20 feet and required them to be placed at least 50 feet from any property line. My turbine was 80 feet tall and sat 30 feet from my rear property line. If this amendment passed, I would have to remove it. The vote was scheduled for late March. The HOA pulled out all the stops, using every tactic they could think of. They claimed my turbine was a liability risk. They got a property value expert to claim homes near my turbine had depreciated. They even suggested the turbine attracted lightning and put the whole neighborhood at risk during storms. I fought back as hard as I could. I got my own property value expert who showed that homes in Desert Winds estates had actually appreciated at a rate higher than neighboring communities. I obtained a letter from a meteorologist explaining that wind turbines do not attract lightning. I shared utility bills showing my near-zero energy costs. The environmental angle helped too. Several younger families in the neighborhood were interested in renewable energy and saw my turbine as a positive example. A local news station even did a story about the controversy, framing it as a battle between progressive homeowners and an overbearing HOA. On election day, turnout was even higher. 325 homeowners voted. I watched nervously as the HOA counted ballots in the clubhouse, the process visible through the windows. Finally, Gladys emerged. Her face was red and she looked furious. Marcus read the results. 298 votes in favor, 27 votes against. They were 2 votes short of the 300 needed. I had won again. Gladys saw me standing in the parking lot and marched over. "This is not over, Samuel. I will find a way to get rid of that monstrosity." "Maybe you should spend less time harassing me and more time serving the community you were elected to represent," I said calmly. "You are not part of this community. You are a virus, a cancer that needs to be cut out." David, who had attended the vote count, stepped forward. "Mrs. Owens, that statement could be construed as threatening. I suggest you walk away now before you make this situation worse for yourself." She glared at both of us but walked away. April arrived, and I finally started to relax. The HOA had lost in court and twice at the ballot box. Gladys seemed to have run out of legal options. My wind turbine spun peacefully, generating power, and I was sleeping better than I had in months. Then I discovered what Gladys had been planning all along. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got home from work and noticed something odd. The wind turbine blades were not spinning, even though it was a breezy day. I checked my monitoring system and saw that the turbine had shut down due to a mechanical fault. I called the installation company, and they sent a technician out the next day. He climbed the tower and inspected the turbine, then came down with a grim expression. "Someone sabotaged it," he said, showing me photos on his phone. "These bolts were deliberately loosened and this cable was cut. This was not mechanical failure. This was intentional damage." I felt sick. "Can you fix it?" "Yes, but it will cost about $3,000 for parts and labor, and you should definitely file a police report." I called the Scottsdale Police Department and filed a report for criminal mischief. An officer came out, looked at the photos, and took a statement. He said they would investigate, but cautioned that without witnesses or video footage of the tower itself, it would be difficult to identify the perpetrator. My security cameras covered the ground around my house, but not the top of the 80-foot tower. I had not anticipated that someone would actually climb it. The technician made the repairs over the next 2 days, and the turbine was operational again by Friday. But I was shaken. Someone had climbed an 80-foot tower in the middle of the night to sabotage my equipment. That level of commitment was frightening. I installed additional security measures, including motion-activated lights around the base of the tower and a camera aimed upward at the turbine assembly. 2 weeks later, the camera caught someone. It was just after midnight on a Saturday when the motion sensors triggered. I was asleep, but woke up to an alert on my phone. I pulled up the camera feed and saw a figure in dark clothing climbing the tower. I called 911 immediately. "There is someone trespassing on my property and climbing my wind turbine tower right now." The dispatcher said officers were on the way. I watched the live feed as the figure reached the turbine and began working on something. About 4 minutes later, I heard sirens approaching. The figure on the tower heard them too and began climbing down rapidly. The police arrived with lights flashing. 3 officers jumped out and surrounded the tower. The climber was about 20 feet up when the officers ordered him to come down. He complied, climbing down slowly. When he reached the ground, the officers handcuffed him and turned him around. Even through the grainy security footage, I recognized him. It was Marcus Chen, the HOA treasurer. I went outside and approached the scene. One of the officers was examining a bag Marcus had been carrying. Inside were wire cutters, a wrench set, and a bottle of industrial lubricant. "Is this your property, sir?" the officer asked me. "Yes, that is Marcus Chen. He is on the HOA board." "I know who he is," Marcus said bitterly. "I am trying to protect this community from his selfishness." "You are under arrest for criminal trespassing and criminal damage to property," the officer said, reading Marcus his rights. As they put Marcus in the patrol car, I asked the officer what would happen next. He explained that Marcus would be booked at the Scottsdale City Jail, and I would need to come to the station to give a formal statement. I went to the police station early Sunday morning and provided a detailed statement, including the previous sabotage incident. The detective handling the case asked about the history with the HOA, and I gave him the full story. "This sounds like it has been going on for a while," the detective said. "Do you think anyone else on the HOA board was involved?" "I do not know," I said honestly. "But Marcus would not have done this on his own. Someone put him up to it." Marcus was released on bail Sunday afternoon. By Monday, the neighborhood was buzzing with the news. The HOA tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, claiming Marcus had been concerned about safety and was conducting an unauthorized inspection. But the police report was clear. He had been caught with tools suitable for sabotage, and the previous damage matched those tools. A group of homeowners, including Robert Singh and Alice Foster, organized a recall petition against Gladys. HOA rules required a petition signed by 25% of homeowners to trigger a recall election. They gathered signatures door to door, explaining how the board's obsession with my wind turbine had cost the community thousands in legal fees and now resulted in a criminal case. Within 2 weeks, they had 140 signatures, well over the required 100. A recall election was scheduled for May. The election was contentious. Gladys campaigned aggressively, claiming she had been protecting the community from my dangerous turbine. Her opponents argued that she had abused her power, wasted community resources, and created a toxic environment. When the votes were counted, Gladys lost. She received only 98 votes out of 307 cast. Patricia Donnelly also lost her seat. Marcus had already resigned from the board following his arrest. The new board was elected in June. Robert Singh became president, and Alice Foster became vice president. One of their first actions was to pass a resolution formally apologizing to me for the previous board's actions. They also announced that the HOA would not contest any further legal claims I might have. Marcus went to trial in September. His lawyer tried to argue that he had been trying to prevent a genuine safety hazard, but the prosecution presented the evidence clearly. Marcus had deliberately climbed my tower in the middle of the night with tools designed to cause damage. The previous sabotage incident, which had occurred before the security cameras were installed, was also likely his doing, though that could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Marcus was convicted of criminal trespassing and criminal damage to property. The judge sentenced him to 6 months in jail, suspended after 60 days served, 3 years probation, and restitution of $5,300 to cover the repairs and my legal expenses. During the sentencing hearing, the judge addressed Marcus directly. "You allowed your disagreement with your neighbor to escalate into criminal behavior. You abused your position on the HOA board and endangered yourself and others by climbing that tower. You are fortunate this did not end with you falling to your death or causing serious damage that could have injured someone. I hope you use your time in jail to reflect on your choices." As Marcus was led away, I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. This never had to happen. If the HOA had simply accepted that my wind turbine was my property and left me alone, none of this would have occurred. Gladys was never criminally charged, but the civil consequences caught up with her. Several homeowners sued the HOA over the wasted legal fees from the lawsuit against me, arguing that the board had acted recklessly and outside its authority. The HOA's insurance company settled those claims for a total of $45,000. As part of the settlement terms, the insurance company required that Gladys and Patricia be permanently barred from serving on the HOA board. The legal battle I had initiated also concluded. As part of the settlement, the HOA paid my attorney fees, which totaled $32,000, issued a formal retraction of the defamatory newsletter, and agreed to never again challenge my wind turbine or attempt to claim any right to the power it generated. By November, nearly a year after the initial power outage, life in Desert Winds Estates had largely returned to normal. The new HOA board focused on actual community issues like road maintenance, landscaping, and planning social events. They left me alone. My wind turbine continued to spin, generating clean power. My electric bills remained near zero. I even started getting inquiries from other homeowners about installing their own turbines. The new board created a renewable energy committee to help residents navigate the permitting process, and Robert asked me to chair it. I accepted. It felt good to turn something negative into something positive. In December, almost exactly a year after the power outage that had started the final phase of the conflict, another windstorm hit Scottsdale. This one was even stronger than the previous year, with sustained winds of 50 miles per hour and gusts over 70. Once again, the power went out across large parts of the area. Once again, my house remained powered. This time, though, things were different. I had expected some renewed resentment, but instead, several neighbors came by to ask advice about generators and renewable energy. One couple asked if they could charge their cell phones at my house, and I agreed. Word spread, and soon I had a small gathering of neighbors in my garage, charging devices and asking questions about my wind turbine system. Alice Foster arrived with a thermos of coffee. "Quite a change from last year," she said with a smile. "It is," I agreed. "I should have refused them last year. I was angry and I wanted them to suffer the consequences of how they had treated me, but I could have been the bigger person." "They did not deserve your help," Alice said. "Sometimes people need to face consequences before they change. Look at what happened. Gladys is gone, Marcus is a convicted criminal, and we have a functional HOA board now. If you had just given in and shared your power last year, none of that would have changed. They would have kept pushing you." She was probably right, but I still felt conflicted about it. The power came back on after 14 hours. As the last of my neighbors left, thanking me for the hospitality, I stood in my driveway and looked up at the wind turbine. The blades were spinning steadily in the dying wind, a testament to engineering and sustainability. I had bought this house because I wanted a place with space, good weather, and the ability to live sustainably. The HOA had nearly driven me out with their greed and pettiness. But I had stood my ground, fought back through legal channels, and ultimately won. The wind turbine remained, generating power, a symbol of individual property rights and the importance of standing up to those who abuse authority. Desert Winds Estates was truly my home now, and my wind generator would keep spinning for years to come, providing me with clean, independent power that was mine and mine alone.